Everybody, thanks for joining today. We'll jump into it. I'm Dustin. I'm the research strategist here at Wynter, and we're going to be running this Wynter workshop today about how to collect actionable target market insights using Wynter. And really, this is going to be kind of an example of the process that I would go through on any of the accounts that we service and people who needs help with understanding their test results. What I'm really going to run you through is like the process that I run through there and why I do that. And then also give you some tips on like how to help share that within your companies, take actual steps and get results from the information that you collect here at Wynter, and really kind of all qualitative research. While I will focus today, specifically on like Wynter and Wynter test results, I mean, this applies really to any types of qualitative research, so you can utilize this, repeatedly. Okay. So I'll pull my slides up here for a second. Okay. So I assume everybody here kind of knows what Wynter is as you sign up for this, but just as a level setting, just in case there's anybody here that does not know what Wynter is, we're an on-demand market research platform. We're delivering you test results back from your types of buyers, your B2B buyers, in less than 48 hours, which is really the phenomenal part of being able to find people who aren't already your customer, so they're not already biased in what they're telling you, and being able to get results back in really quick order. I did a lot of qualitative research for companies before I joined Wynter, and this normally would take weeks, and you're probably just using your own customers and getting kind of mad results. And so Wynter is a way to improve all of that. Spoiler alert for today is that really Wynter is focused on making all of that easy, right? As I was just saying. So we can actually very easily get the actionable insights, and I'll walk you through a little bit about that today, give you a couple pro tips that people typically like to hear from me. But then we're really going to focus on that taking action part, because that's the hard part, okay? We have a number of different test types here at Wynter. We can do surveys, you can do interviews, we have test house preference tested and so forth. However, really I'm going to focus today on message testing and the process that I go through with, oh, you can't see my screen. Interesting. Oh, that would help if I hit the share button. I'm sorry, everybody. There we go. Thanks, Karen. More technical problems. Just to really back up here quick then. That was the slide for what was Wynter. And then, like I said, the easier parts of this. So here, we're only this far in. We didn't miss much. We're going to focus today, like I said, on the message testing, the process that we go through here for message testing specifically, and analyzing those. In the future, we could probably put together workshops as well for surveys and so forth, because there we really want to also talk about the strategies as well that we do with surveys and how to go through those, because the workload there is a little bit different as well. So going through the page messaging test that we have, we have the full page test, which I really like for being able to get like granular and directed feedback. And what I mean by that is, like, you're actually going to, when you set up this test, you're going to highlight areas that people are going to go directly to and answer specific questions about that portion of the page only. So you're going to get a lot of qualitative feedback about very targeted areas of your page that you pick out and say where you need the feedback from. And then people are going to answer that set of questions only about that portion, which is really going to help you drill in to the copy and the messaging that you have there, understanding, are people getting it? Or is it confusing? Is it serving its purpose or not? And so you're really going to be able to make targeted changes using the full page test. So this is really our bread and butter test. Is the broadest or the largest test that you're going to really get for message testing. This works great for home pages, but you can use it on any page as well. But specifically for sure, home pages, this is going to be the easiest test that you want to do. Whether you're redesigning your home page in general, or you just need to update it, or maybe you just don't know how well it's really performing, or you don't know why it's underperforming. That's a really great thing about Wynter as well. You might have a lot of data that tells you, how much people bounce out, or how far they get on your page, or are they clicking your buttons and all of that stuff. But you don't necessarily know why they are or not doing that. And that's what the test is going to help you be able to get. Also, in keeping it easy, we have a framework here about the B2B messaging layers, and really through all of the Wynter data that we've seen, how we view the order of importance on your pages, especially your home page, where you're going to want to be tackling clarity first and foremost, that people need to know what it is, followed by relevance, value, and differentiation. I have a bit.ly link on the bottom there if you wanted to screen cap this or get it in the slides later, where you can go into a little bit of a blog post that was explaining our thought process here. But I highlight this because on the full page test, we actually have templates that align with these as well. So even if you wanted to just be able to get in and test directly with Clarity or whatever, you can get those questions that we recommend. There are plenty of other questions in the full page test, and you can write your own as well. These are just really good starting points to get you going for doing that test. We also have the landing page test, which doesn't have to necessarily only be a landing page test. This page will work better with less copy. The more copy you get, the more broad and generalized the feedback is going to become. What the difference here is you're not going to direct people on the page as you did on the full page test. You're going to present a page to them and ask them a set of questions. So in that capacity, you're going to get, like I said, a broader range and even kind of a more organic range. You're going to see what are the things that people are more specifically talking about when they're not guided. So it's a good way, as I refer to it often, is like getting a pulse check, especially on like even if you are doing on the homepage, or maybe you just don't need to go as in depth on the copy and you just need to know, how this page is working on broad strokes. So that's the landing page test. And then the pricing page, well, it's best for pricing page feedback. The pricing page test actually works very similar to the landing page test, but actually what's different about this, and we just only launched this test like about two to 3 weeks ago, is the pricing page, while it is a highly viewed page on your website, testing in Wynter is a little tricky because you need context, right? If you just go cold to any other product's pricing page, you don't know what problem they're solving, or is it for you? It's really kind of hard to evaluate the value that you're seeing on a pricing page. So on the pricing page test, we actually ask you for your homepage link first, and they're going to view your homepage. They aren't going to give you feedback on it. They're just going to view it so they get a better understanding of what your solution is. And then they're going to go to your pricing page where they're going to answer a set of questions similar to the landing page test, where they're going to just look at the entirety of the page and answer questions about it versus being directed to specific portions of it. So all of these tests also come with an AI summary. So again, in the keeping things easy and getting the actionable parts of this easy, this is available right away when you get done with your test. It's going to give you a small thematic analysis of all of the qualitative information that's in here. Now, you will have several different qualitative questions that you've asked throughout the entirety of the test. And the AI summary takes all of that qualitative information and then puts it into its summary. So it's not breaking it down question by question. And it's also AI, right? I mean, it's been around long enough that we all understand that it's really good for getting things started. It's not necessarily good for doing the entirety of the work. And that's kind of the thing for today, right? This is awesome that you're going to be able to see the larger trends that are in your test and in your data right away. So you easily know if there's something to take action on or what you can start telling people about the test after it was finished. But you're still going to want to dive into it a little bit further to fully understand that. So all of those easy parts are done, but just like if anybody's an Arrested Development fan, I'm always still utilize the phrase, there's always money in the banana stand. There's all the money and the qualitative insights you're going to get back is still on having somebody sit down and go through the results that you get, which, there's a process that you want to run through to do it, to really dig into that. And that's what we're going to dive into for the rest of the presentation this morning. So I'm going to back out of here. And we're going to do ourselves some tab jumping a little bit. Okay. So we're going to go through a pricing page test that we ran ourselves using the new pricing page on our pricing page. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is identify the patterns in the feedback. So if I go and take a look at this pricing page test, you'll see, let me collapse this for you for a second. So we got a mix here of some qualitative information and some Likert scale-based questions as well. So the Likert scale questions, I'm not going to focus too heavily on today. These are good for, again, understanding the ranges of things. But we're going to really spend a lot more time going through the qualitative that you got here. And in fairness, we got a lot of great qualitative feedback here, but it's pretty amazing how quickly, like the themes really came through on this test. What I'm going to show you is like how the process should go for making sense of this qualitative information so that you can share internally with other people. I'm going to jump really quick to the AI summary that we had on this report. And you'll see as we start going through this data that the pricing structure requires clarity. The AI is right. This is definitely true. The tier order is counterintuitive. This is also true. I would say, compared to the AI, I would say this was the number one categorization that's really going on here, but it's not wrong, right? So again, like I said, super useful for understanding the larger strokes of things. But as we go through the qualitative in here, you'll see that I'll highlight some spots where there's information in here that's still actually really useful for Wynter that the AI just doesn't realize it, it doesn't have the context for, so it doesn't realize to raise it in importance or flag it, which is why it's also important to have somebody sit down and kind of go through these things, because there's a lot of useful information here that you don't want to be leaving behind. So, and especially when you're trying to find different things to take action on. So how do we go about actually making sense of all of this qualitative information? All of the test types in Wynter, you can download a CSV for. And what I've started here today, putting together like a typical way that you would start going and codifying. And this is a very standard process of how you would go and start codifying qualitative information. Spoiler alert again is I'm not going to actually end up utilizing the spreadsheet for this, and I'll explain why. But some people do. You like to do this method, and I'll do this in certain instances. But I've done enough page test summaries in my time here at Wynter now that I found that this is slightly restrictive, I think, into what and how I want to really do this. If I was doing a survey or things like that, I'm going to go into a spreadsheet and start breaking apart the data. But here, where we're going to typically on a page test, you're going to maybe have 15, maybe only 30 results. I'm not going to be worried too much about some of the different cohorts necessarily, because I just don't have enough people. But if you want to go through this process, it is very typical, and it's going to kind of set the groundwork for what we'll do in the other example. So all I did is downloaded this, and you can see like this was the first question that we asked everybody, which what is your impressions of the pricing page, and then it's got everybody's responses. And really, what you're going to do as you start reading through this is you're going to want to start finding different ways that you want to categorize the answers, or what people would refer to it as a code. I don't typically use that language, so but different ways that you want to code that or qualify it, buckets essentially that you want to kind of put things into. So you're kind of grouping liked answers, and the benefit here is you're going to get a count of like how many people out of all of these responses, how many people fall into that category. If you end up wanting to go the spreadsheet route on something like this, what I would recommend is that you actually take the time first to read all of these responses before you get into trying to create this, because it's, in my opinion, just too cumbersome. You're going to be changing these because you don't necessarily know. Here in this data set again, these order of plans be confusing, and these first two, these are super obvious within moments of going through the data, so you would know that one. But you're going to find a lot of other ones, like maybe like this one about unsure about the CTA, where a lot of people aren't necessarily picking it, and you won't know, should I make a category for it? Is it worth it? Is it just a one-off comment? What do I do with it? And you could end up in a spot where you just have a ton of these columns that are kind of counting up the count of how many people are saying these. So in this example, I do have these categorizations of order of the plans is confusing, and they don't understand what pay as you go is. And then I'm just marking a tally here for, okay, this one falls into that category, and so does this one. So answers can fall into more than one. And this is just doing a quick summation of how many have I added up. I haven't done this through the whole data set, as you can see, so it's not a full count, but that's really the kind of the process that you're going through. You can also do that with the things that aren't qualitative. And so this is where, if I did want to like break this data out more easily and say like, okay, well, I want to maybe like know like all people who gave me a 1, what did they more easily say? When you're going through your Wynter test data in Wynter, you can't really access that information, right? I can see that how many people voted a 1 that they don't understand it at all, for how clearly they understand the differences between these plans, but I don't know who said that and how it maps to the answers that they gave me here. So this is one way that the spreadsheet is easy, if you want that information, that you can go and pull that and see that, and maybe, what you want to group out, like, hey, everybody who said 4s and 5s, here's their feedback and so forth. Again, on 15 people, I personally don't find that that's typically as useful all of the time, but your mileage may vary. So you can do that for all of this data. Okay, so that's a lot of looking at the spreadsheet when I said that I don't do it this way. And what I want to look at is actually this comment right here to help explain why I personally don't like to do it that way. So I'm going to hop back into the slide for a second so we can view this a little bit better. So this is a huge quote, right? There's a lot of information here. And as you can see on the spreadsheet, if you noticed, I actually have marked 4 different columns for this one. So that's great in terms of counting how many, how many categories this answer fits into. But what I know less of is like, what of these comments am I considering falling into each of these buckets, right? So if I go back, I mean, just kind of highlighting these, you can see that, in my opinion, at least, of how I would kind of break these out, this top line yellow one, this is actually ends up being like our larger theme, right? So really what we're looking for is we're kind of grouping comments together, making categories, codes, whatever you want to call it. And then if necessary, tying them together as a theme. And really the biggest theme here is the pricing page is quite confusing to people, but it's confusing in different ways. There's different things that are confusing them. So that's why the confusing bit is the theme. And then there's just different categorizations of how they're being confused. So I just did a little highlight here to break up, like, here's how I would view these four. And if you go through, like even this comment where I would categorize this question about the credits, they come back to it again at the end, right? So for me, that's why I find the spreadsheet a bit difficult, because I don't necessarily know which comments are the ones that directly tie to this. Plus, I like being able to show the comments in the final results, as we'll take a look at as well. So I think that it's best to go through on more of just like a working document, and I typically just do this in a Google Doc. So the process that I'll go through here is I'll kind of start off with a grouping of like negative sentiments and positive sentiments that I'm finding as I go through. This process keeps me from having to I can be a little bit more quick and efficient, because I don't have to like really read it all first to get the bits that I want. What I do is start reading through, Amanda's response here. And I could say, pay as you go versus pricing tiers is a little confusing. Okay. Yep. As an end user, it's strange, blah, blah, blah. So I can understand that, okay, I want to keep this, and I can copy this, and I can bring it back into my document. Okay. And that's going to be in a negative sentiment. And I can paste this in here. And as I'll go, I'll kind of start grouping these out. Okay. Once I have a couple of comments that are kind of the same, like around this category, I'll maybe just bucket those into their own. And I could have, another one here that I find, and so on and so forth. So I'm starting to just naturally, as I go, be able to push things around. But I'm also capturing smaller comments that in the end, maybe they don't establish their own theme. Maybe they aren't their own category. There's just not enough of them. But there's often going to be results as well where somebody can just say a one-off thing, or maybe two people say it, that you again know, the AI doesn't know, but like, wow, that's actually super interesting to know. It's something that we should explore and do something with, and so forth. So I find that this process is just a little simpler from at least my mental model of like going through and making sense of this data, and just like building this as I go. And maybe as I go, then I can just like put a label here, right, that says like what this category is and so forth. So I can kind of just work through that. And this just gives me that an easy basis to start. And what I'll start building is something more like this, right? So the question that I'm working on right now, the first one again is what are your first impressions? So I'm working on first impressions, and I'm starting to figure out, okay, there's a pattern here about the order of the plans. So now I'm lumping together the comments that I'm finding in here about the order of the plans. And personally, I'm pulling all of them that I find, and I'm just kind of casting them. There's more than this, but this is just gives you an example of like how that process would be going. Here's some people who don't understand pay as you go. These are the bits that I pulled from that. The nice thing else that I'm doing here is I'm not necessarily taking the whole thing all of the time. Like you can see here, I didn't copy in that case like so there's assumptions being made here, right? I'm trying to continually make this shorter and easier for everybody to distill. So I'm just taking the parts that are relevant for whatever I'm after. So if again you go back to, actually toggle this for a second. So this is the one that I'd flagged out that we had looked at the slide, right? So now if I go back to this big chunk of information, now I can just copy out the pieces that I need, and I can paste them into wherever they go. Or maybe they're still just sitting compiled in like groupings that I don't have yet, but comments that I think are of note, and then I might do something with later, or I might not. So that's how I'm going to kind of keep going through this. I did favorite a few of these that I just kind of want to also walk through to illustrate a bit more what I mean by this, where there's going to be useful information in here that maybe doesn't get picked up. So this response, for instance, there's some questions about they're feeling good in general. So I'm going to note this as positive. But they also have a question here about, is there a free version? Okay, well, that's an interesting question. A couple people will pick that up and say that as well, right? So these are just examples of like you're going to get different bits of information from people. Another one here. Let's see, what was, I forget what this one was. You should say yes, it's not cheap. Oh, this is about comments of some of the extra comments in here. So this is where I picked this one just because like this is an example of where this is going to be information that there's no trend established, there's no category for this, but it's stuff that we still might actually want to understand and do something with for improvements that we want to make on this page. So that's where then sometimes when I do these, I'll make just like a grouping of like, hey, here's comments that are of note, but that we don't want to lose track of. And sometimes there's going to be comments that just apply to completely different things that are also useful as well. So we're going to go through and do that with, I'm going to switch the order of these for a second. So we're going to go through and do that for each of these qualitative questions, right? So the next question was, how would you describe the differences between these pans to a colleague? So if I collapse this for a second, and we take a look at these ones. Turn the favorites off for a second, actually. So now I'm going to repeat this process again. And very quickly, I'm starting to see different buckets and just doing the same whole thing over again. Okay, so pretty straightforward what you're going to do there. It's just a little time consuming, but I think that you're really going to get to know in depth the information that you're going through here. Okay, so I think everybody, I presume, kind of understands that process. I don't need to kind of keep repeating how that goes. Now, how do you start making this into something that is usable for yourself and other people, right? So I have kind of a finalized example of what you're going to want to start doing with this. As I said earlier, the kind of confusing bit becomes the larger theme. Sometimes you might not have a larger theme. You might just kind of end up with just like the categories that you put in, and maybe they kind of seem like a few small themes. That's fine. Like, again, we're talking with like 15 people. We're not writing research reports like, well, okay, we're writing a research report. We're not writing like, big like academic reports in general, right? We're still trying to do B2B marketing and understand our buyers and what they're, what struggles that they're having. So you don't need to be overly scientific about this in general. But what I'll typically do is like, if I have the theme, I'll kind of, identify what that theme is, give a little write-up about that, and then I'll go back into the things that we were categorizing before. And again, probably provide a little context, a little write-up about what this category is. And then I personally like to showcase the comments that we actually received and the ones that I picked out. Now, your mileage might vary here. You might find this to be overwhelming and so forth. But at this stage of the process, I still like to show all of these. This isn't even all of them that were in here. These are just the ones I pulled for this example. But I'll probably go highlight ones that I think are really of note for people who might go and take a look at this report later in your company and they aren't going to necessarily read everything. I sometimes would think of these reports very much like your web pages. People don't read every word of your web page. Probably most people, I'm guessing, are not going to read every word that you write in this report. So I still like to highlight things that are, that I think people should direct attention to. That's typically how I'll go through that. And then do the same thing for each of the other categories that you're finding, right? On and on with that. So that gets us through, we've identified the patterns, and now we're in the summarizing your findings. Now, the digestible way is the thing that we really want to start working on. So part of the thing there is digestible bit. Make sure that you're kind of identifying next steps. It's one thing to like just collect this information and say, hey, here are the patterns and things that I found with this. But what's really going to be useful is actually start identifying things that you should do with this information. It's very easy for qualitative data to just become, a nice, interesting bit, and then it goes and sits on the shelf while we do the millions of other things that we need to do. But we took the time to collect this and we found really usable stuff. And in our case, especially, like we found some super useful stuff about the pricing page that if you don't act on, you're just leaving sitting there with, like, we know there's tons of confusion. So if you don't act on it, like, you're just doing yourself a disservice while you have all of this information. So design some next steps, recommendations about what to do with the information, and then, figure out how to share this within your company. Now, you could always share a PDF report of this. It's going to help make sense of all the test data that's there. You can share the test itself as well, right? You can make an active link and anybody can come and take a look at this. They don't need to have an account or whatever. As long as you give them this link, they can come and take a look at the information that you have. But as we've seen, there's a lot to kind of start going through and making sense of. So you've done some of the work for them of going through it and making some sense of it. But, just like a web page, it's still going to be harder for people to kind of digest that. So the best thing I think from this point is this now distill what you have in your report into something that's a little bit more shareable. Maybe it's a slide deck. And so I just mocked up a quick slide example about this first question, for instance. I don't typically like to do like the 80% of respondents and so forth on a 15-person data set. People do find this more digestible though. So again, kind of figure out what you feel comfortable with there. Like I said, I don't tend to do it. Sometimes I'll just flag out and say, hey, 7 people said this or whatever, just so you kind of know. Again, you could reverse that to a percentage, but people take a lot more faith in it once you put it in a percentage. In this case, from my count, 12 out of 15 people that we got on this test fell into this bucket of finding the order that we presented the pricing plans to be confusing. And if you can't see it very well, what was happening was we were started with our most expensive plan down to our cheapest plan from where everybody was expecting it to go the other way. And they identified as well some reasons that was wrong in their view. So this is going to help people understand this without having to go through the report in just a much more summarized, clean way, showing what the confusion is, a little bit of a write-up. I show an example of what we're talking about. And then I distill, instead of here, where I would have had, all of these comments and even more realistically, now I'm going to try and find even just a fewer better nuggets that are in here. So I just picked 4. And then again, I'm going to take that same pattern and be like, okay, I'm going to bold the parts that I think are really stressing this point, right? Like, oh, I personally find it odd, or this takes extra mental load to process, which is a fair point. It doesn't make sense with how I process information, right? So it's just kind of helping you to drive that point home. So you could do this for each of the questions or themes that you're kind of finding, and make just more of like a slide presentation deck that you can easily pass around, and people will be able to digest a little bit easier. And then they can, if they so choose, can go in and read the report and find a little bit more information as well. But going through that process of writing the report is going to help you make really good, concise, like slides or whatever to share around internally about the information that people can take action on. Okay. And that is the important part, the taking action part. In our case, with the pricing page, we found like I said, a lot of overwhelming information. We actually ran 2 more pricing page tests with different wireframes or different ideas of how to handle it. We talked about it internally, the confusions that people were having, the things that were tripping people up, and how to go around it. And some of them even came into larger discussions about how we package our price, our accounts and so forth, right? So it wasn't even just about the page. It became a lot of internal strategy conversations as well based on the feedback. So we ran actually 2 more page tests within Wynter before we actually got to what is currently live as of right now, the newer version of the pricing page. So if we take a look really quickly, I mean, this was the old pricing page with a lot going on. This pay-as-you-go portion was being really confusing to people. The fact that this said usage-based pricing, but we talked about credits down here confused people. The order priority here confused people. They weren't, especially with sometimes saying like, oh, you get everything that's in this account, but it was backwards. They found some of these copy bits to be punchy, but maybe not useful. Some people talked about, the year in good company versus testimonials. A bunch of stuff was in here, things that we didn't even talk about and look at in today's example. But that led to a much more simplified approach, removing the pay-as-you-go language that confused people, letting them kind of know what that is really meant for instead of giving it a label, right? Putting some company logos and things like that in there. So there's probably still more improvements we can make to this page, but within 2 weeks, we've been able to run 3 tests and actually come up with a much more refined page that we're going live with versus having to just sit there as it was and not doing anything with it. So that's the part where the hard work was actually going through and finding those things, prescribing things to do, and then actually doing them, right? I do think that's the internal struggle because, again, there's a lot of things going on for all of us and all of our companies, but actually doing something with this is going to be able to drive improvement and keep you moving forward. So that's the live example there. Last but not least, before questions, I do have breakdowns for if anybody wants to look at any of these things or use them as examples. You can screen grab this, or it'll be in the email, I'm sure, later as well. But I do have links that go to each of the things that we looked at, just so if you wanted to go into them a little bit more. One, including the pricing page itself, if you want to actually go through the feedback yourself and read what you would get out of Wynter, the spreadsheet example I had, and then the document example. So that's the info that I have for you today. I hope it's useful, and I think we still have some time for questions if there are any. You're welcome. You're welcome. I don't see if anybody has any questions, we can address them, or otherwise we can get everybody back into their holiday week. Your call. Give a moment to see if anybody has anything there. All right. Well, I take that as questions are not covered or necessary, which means I'm sure just, hit all the buckets that we needed to bucket. Cool. Yeah, no questions. Awesome, Amber. Cool. You're welcome, Paul. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday week.